What if the Yellowstone volcano erupted tomorrow? The consequences would be catastrophic, with widespread damage and loss of life. The eruption could potentially devastate the entire United States, and the world would be watching in horror as the disaster unfolds. We are back here again with an interesting question, and that is, what is going to happen if the Yellowstone volcano erupts tomorrow? Let us look at the possibility and significance. A huge eruption of the supervolcano under Yellowstone National Park may spread ash over thousands of square miles of the United States, destroying infrastructure, burying crops, and knocking out electrical grids. That's a terrible idea. But that's no need to get into a panic. Lucky for us, the likelihood of it occurring is minimal. Only 3 genuinely massive eruptions have occurred over the whole history of the Yellowstone supervolcano, which is thousands of times more powerful than an ordinary volcano. Despite what you might have read or heard in the media, there is currently no evidence to suggest that another super eruption is imminent. It's conceivable that Yellowstone may never see another explosion of such magnitude. It's easy to understand why the Yellowstone supervolcano is drawing so much doomsday interest. What could a Yellowstone supereruption look like was the subject of an article published in Geochemistry, Geophysics, Geosystems in September 2014. They discovered, among other things, that the volcano might produce enough dangerous volcanic ash to blanket the Midwest and bury regions like Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, and Colorado under 3 feet of shattered rock and glass. Ash of such magnitude has the potential to suffocate vegetation and animals, collapse roofs, and overload electrical systems. When we contacted the U.S. Geological Survey co-author Jacob Lowenstern, he emphasized that the work did not constitute a forecast. He argues that the worst-case scenario is unlikely, even if Yellowstone were to erupt again. The news generally overlooks the fact that minor eruptions are much more prevalent, and such little eruptions are quite uncommon. At the Yellowstone Volcano Observatory in Menlo Park, California, Lowenstern serves as the senior scientist in charge. So I gave him a rundown of what we know about the Yellowstone supervolcano, what an eruption from it may look like, and why the likelihood of tragedy is minimal. There's a heated magma reservoir 5 miles below Yellowstone National Park, fed by a massive plume of molten rock rising from hundreds of miles below. Many of the park's well-known geysers and hot springs may be directly attributed to this heat. When magma enters a chamber and cools, it causes the ground above to rise and sink at regular intervals. This magma chamber has only erupted a few times in recorded history. Most Yellowstone eruptions have produced rather modest lava flows, the most recent of which occurred on Pitchstone Plateau about 70,000 years ago. However, the distant but real risk of a cataclysmic supereruption is what really draws people to Yellowstone. An eruption of magnitude 8 or above on the Volcano Explosivity Index is considered a supereruption because it ejects at least 1,000 cubic kilometers or 240 cubic miles of material. You could bury the state of Texas with that. Thousands of times more powerful than the largest eruptions we're accustomed to, these super eruptions are unprecedented. USGS has produced a table comparing the Yellowstone super eruptions with those of Mount St. Helens in 1980. There's a huge gap between the two. Yellowstone has experienced 3 of these incredibly enormous eruptions in its history: 2.1 million years ago, 1.3 million years ago, and 664,000 years ago. The most recent of these eruptions occurred at Yellowstone Lava Creek, and it expelled so much material that it created a hole in the earth 34 miles by 50 miles in size, which is now known as the Yellowstone Caldera. It's worth remembering that Yellowstone is hardly the only supervolcano out there. Geologists have uncovered evidence of at least 47 super eruptions in Earth's history. The last one was about 26,000 years ago in New Zealand's Lake Taupo. More spectacularly, there was the colossal Toba eruption 74,000 years ago, driven by shifting tectonic plates. That produced a catastrophic 6 to 10 year global cold and, according to others, may have almost wiped out the budding human species. On average, the Earth has undergone around 1 supereruption every 100,000 years, but that's not an absolute rule. Let me restate the exceedingly low probability of a Yellowstone eruption of any size. Nevertheless, if we are speculating, a modest eruption that generated lava flows and maybe a normal volcanic explosion is the most plausible scenario for Yellowstone. This would probably begin with an earthquake cluster in a particular part of the park when the magma rose to the surface. If a far larger super eruption were to occur, however, the indicators would be considerably more noticeable. We'd likely initially experience significant seismic activity over the whole park, Lowenstern adds. The tremors may shake the rocks above the magma for weeks or months before an eruption occurs. What if a super eruption occurred, one that was 1,000 times more powerful than the average volcanic eruption, spewed at least 240 cubic miles of material, and lasted for weeks or months? The actual lava flows themselves would be confined to a radius of around 40 miles inside the park. Only about a third of the staff could reach the upper atmosphere at best. Volcanic ash, a mixture of shattered rock and glass, would be propelled kilometers into the air and spread throughout the country, causing the most destruction. Historical ash deposits and sophisticated modeling led Lowenstern and his co-workers to infer in their recent article that an eruption would produce an umbrella cloud extending uniformly in all directions. Large regions of Wyoming, Idaho, Colorado, Montana, and Utah might be devastated by a super eruption that buried the northern Rockies under 3 feet of ash. Meanwhile, the Midwest would receive a few inches of ash, while both coastlines would experience much lower quantities. Seasonal and climatic factors would determine the precise pattern of dispersion. It would be really bad if any of those things happened. Volcanic ash may suffocate people, collapse houses, and destroy plants and animals. Destroying crops, clogging roads, causing significant respiratory issues, blocking sewage lines, and even shorting out transformers are all possible consequences of simply a few inches of ash, which is what most of the nation may receive. Air traffic would have to be shut down over most of North America. The entire climate would be significantly impacted by such a massive volcanic eruption. Volcanoes may release sulfur aerosols that reflect sunlight back into the atmosphere and cool the environment. Because these particles have such a brief life in the air, their impact is fleeting, but impressive nevertheless. When Pinatubo erupted in 1991, it chilled the globe by around 1 degree Celsius or 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit for a few years. The Tambora eruption in 1815 chilled the globe sufficiently to destroy crops throughout the world, perhaps contributing to famines in certain regions. And they were very small eruptions compared to what a supervolcano is, in principle, capable of. Very meager or little. Perhaps Yellowstone will never erupt again. Right now, there's no evidence of a looming eruption. Yellowstone Park does continue to receive earthquakes, and the ground continues to rise and fall, but that's nothing out of the norm. Yellowstone's acting as it has for the previous 140 years, the USGS points out. Odds are quite strong that Yellowstone will remain eruption-free for the next decades. The USGS also observes that if you merely took the previous 3 eruptions, the probabilities of Yellowstone exploding in any given year are 0.00014%, lower than the probability of being struck by a civilization-destroying asteroid. The certainty that Yellowstone erupts on a regular cycle or that it is overdue for another eruption renders even this estimate meaningless. Yellowstone may never see another major eruption. The Earth will experience super eruptions in the future, but will they happen in Yellowstone? That's not a definite thing, adds Lowenstern. Yellowstone's already had a wonderfully long life and may not even witness the 4th eruption. Volcanoes, after all, do go out. The magma chamber underneath Yellowstone is being impacted by 2 conflicting factors: the heat welling up from below and the relative cold from the surface. If less heat flows in from below, the chamber might theoretically freeze, ultimately turning into a solid granite body. It's also worth mentioning that the volcanic hotspot below Yellowstone is steadily shifting to the northeast. For a long period, the hotspot will migrate out from beneath Yellowstone, and the Yellowstone supervolcano will presumably die out. Another supervolcano may theoretically form farther to the northeast, but this would need the hotspot to warm up and melt the icy crust first, and that process may take 1,000,000 years or more. It's hard to wrap our heads around something like 1,000,000 years, Lowenstern adds. Humans are a relatively brand new species, but Earth's been around a very long period, and these systems take a long time to perform what they do. So, hey, we are done with this video. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel if you like the content and want to watch more videos just like this one. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.